Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Annmarie Hylton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For May, we are examining diversity. And in this episode, we're focusing on Democratize and Diversify community giving. Minorities have historically been left out of the philanthropy community in a number of ways, both as donors and as recipients of funding. The exclusion stems from systematic issues tied to race, class, power, and representation. Philanthropic institutions are overwhelmingly led by white individuals. A 2020 report by the Council on Foundations and Change Philanthropy found that people of color are significantly underrepresented in leadership positions across foundations. Philanthropic efforts often reflect the priorities and narratives of wealthy donors, who are predominantly white. This can skew funding towards solutions or models that may not be rooted in the lived experiences or needs of marginalized communities. Even when minority groups are consulted, it's sometimes superficial, like being included for diversity optics without real power or influence in setting the agenda. Systematic racism has contributed to massive racial wealth caps, limiting the ability of communities of color to participate in traditional philanthropic movements or as major donors. Even when individuals of color do give, their contributions are often overlooked or excluded from mainstream philanthropy narratives, which tend to center around wealthy white donors. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Hali Lee, who has spent her career doing her best to democratize and diversify the field and practice of philanthropy. She's the founder of Radiant Strategies and co-founder of Donors of Color Network, the first ever national project that is researching, engaging, and networking high net wealth donors of color across race, ethnicity, and life experience. She was a member of the co-design team that birthed Philanthropy Together in 2020, built to scale and strengthen the collective giving movement nationally, and is a member of its inaugural advisory board. Hali is the founder of the Asian Women Giving Circle, which raises resources for Asian American women using the arts to bring about social change in their NYC communities. In 15 years, the circle has made grants of over $1 million in support of 80 amazing projects. Let's get into the interview. Hali Lee was born in Seoul, South Korea. Grew up in Kansas City. She graduated from Princeton University, studied Buddhism in Bangkok, Thailand, and received a master's in social work from New York University. Hali has worked in many capacities and served on many boards, often combining the love of learning, the arts, and equitable social change. Hali's first book, The Big We, hit the shelves earlier this year, and it covers how giving circles can strengthen change. Welcome, Hali.
Hi, Annmarie. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm standing. We're here.
That's good. I'm so excited about this interview because I think it is timely. And I think it's timely because earlier this year, we're entering now the second quarter of 2025. A lot of nonprofit organizations, I would say, I'll just use the word experience a shock
Yeah.
from the government of things being pulled out from underneath them in regards to funding and just, I think it's just not only just obviously money is always the needed tool, but just it put a big question mark about where are we morally as a nation.
Yeah.
And in life, they say there's always, I don't know, this is just the general say, they always say there's two types of people. There's the givers and the takers. And so every time when I interview someone, I try to find out a little bit about them from a personal aspect of what made them who they are as a human being and what inspired you to become a giver in life.
Oh, that's such a sweet question. It's got to be my family. I guess there's a lot of ways in, but I guess I'll answer this by starting with this. I'm Korean American. My family moved to America from Korea in the late 60s after the Immigration Act of 1965, which opened up the country to people who were from other countries besides mostly Western Europe, which had been the predominant immigration groups until that point. And so my family took advantage of that and came here. And my mom and dad were always and I grew up in Kansas City. And my brother and I were the only Asian kids at our school, actually, until Kim Wong came in 5th grade. And Kim and I are still friends to this day. But my mom and dad were always part of something called a ge, which is a Korean shared savings circle. I don't know, Annmarie, if you've heard of a tontine or a susu or a tanda, this idea of pooling resources in order to share it with each other is a common cultural construct in almost every culture. And I'm keeping a list. I just met a woman from Morocco who has the very same thing in her culture and community, and it's called a dadet. So the ge that I'm talking about that my mom and dad were always part of was social and a little bit frivolous. I've been part of several ges with my girlfriends in New York City where I live. And for example, if there were 5 of us in the ge, we might put $100 into the pot every month when we would meet for lunch at Ippudo or something. Or maybe it would be $200 or $300 depending on how rich we felt. And we would take turns taking that pot home. And we could use that money in my girlfriend's gift for whatever we wanted. I bought myself a computer once my turn, threw my husband a birthday party, and another time that it was my turn. So I've done this many times with my friends. It's a common thing. And then I had the idea one year to just turn that into a philanthropic charitable vehicle. And that was the birth of the Asian Women Giving Circle. And we're turning 20 this year. And we remain an all-volunteer group of girlfriends who are pulling our money and giving it away together around a set of shared values and some conversations about what's important to us. So I guess that's one of the roots. And then, of course, my mom and dad have always, they're 89 and 94. I'm lucky to still have them around. I spent a lot of time with them in New Mexico where they live. And they've always supported me. So I've had a strong foundation of love and support, even though they never really understood and still don't understand what my brother and I do. He works in social change and social impact as well. So we didn't really do the typical Korean thing they didn't pressure us to become a lawyer or a doctor. They let us find our path. And for that, I'm really grateful.
Wow. So giving was, I would say, almost built into your DNA, I would say.
Well, I think it is for all
Mhm,
of us, actually,
mhm.
Annmarie. I mean, that's one of the contentions in my book. We might not call it philanthropy. I really think that all of us come from cultures of generosity, and it's the modern American practice, the professional practice of philanthropy that's divorced us from those cultural roots. And it's one of the arguments I make in my book.
Yes, and I know your book just came out just in this last month, and I actually, in preparing for this interview, I was reading lots of reviews, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into your book as we get into the interview. But I think it is, I'm sure when you were probably a little bit writing it, but not knowing, of course, how the year 2025 would start to
Yeah,
unfold,
it's really true. Yeah.
it hit at such a timely period in time, and the reviews I was reading and things where it was hitting people's heartstrings in, I believe, right way of rethinking where we are in the period that we are in.
I hope so. None of us knew. None of us know the future. And I was writing this book before the presidential election. And then I was like, oh God. But I'm hoping that the messages in my book are useful for any time, really, because it's really, ultimately, we can go through it. But I hope if I've written it well, where it lands, Annmarie, is that philanthropy is a form of civic engagement. It's not this elite thing that only wealthy people do. If I've written it well, that's where it lands. And I think that's what philanthropy as a sector really needs to grapple with and hopefully retie itself to that idea of philanthropy as a form of civic engagement. And I make the argument in my book that doing good in a group is a great way to do good because if you do it arm in arm with girlfriends or book group mates or neighbors or work friends, colleagues, the thing you're doing will be more fun, which will be stickier. You'll do it for longer and you'll feel a sense of community and belonging as you do that good thing together. And in a time, this is another part of my book, that we're in this epidemic of loneliness in this country and around the world. And this loneliness is literally killing us. Dr. Vivek Murthy wrote about this very movingly before he left as Surgeon General of the United States. And I forget the exact statistic, but loneliness is as dangerous as smoking like many packs of cigarettes a day. It's as dangerous as drinking many glasses of wine a day. Americans are dying earlier from deaths of despair, which are like suicide and addiction. It's really tragic. So, what are the small things that all of us can do that don't cost a lot of money to not be so lonely, and for our neighbors and friends and colleagues to not be so lonely? So, I think giving circles, doing good in a group is one way. It's not the only way, certainly, but it's one cheap way that we can engage together that has a really nice benefit of also of making us less lonely.
Yeah, so they always, as I've read as well about the giving, like giving gives you life, and especially it's in our, I'll just say, our self-absorbed society that we are have created. It's radical to I guess turn back to our natural state. It's become
Exactly.
radical. It's become
Yes.
radical.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really
Yes.
right. It's isn't it so radical to go back to how we always were? That
Yes,
maybe
yes.
it is.
Yes, it's become radical. I've just been looking at it across the board, not only in talking about philanthropy, but one of my favorite things is food.
Uh-huh.
Been going back to even eating stuff that comes straight from the ground, right? It's
Yes.
radical,
Yeah,
radical now.
radical. That's such a good point. Yeah. And
Yes.
it might just save us doing that radical thing.
Right, to go back to the quote roots,
I
pun
love it,
intended and
Annmarie.
an unintended.
Yes, literally and
Yes.
figuratively, right? Yes.
Yes. And I guess one of the things I also wanted to, since you, I guess, already had this natural state or upbringing of being givers,
We all do.
and so then when you went to study, and I know you studied like social work, and usually people that go into social work are they have a heart for people and issues, and your background, you I guess already had this in mind. I'm making the assumption as a young person, or perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe you were just like, "It works," and I go for it.
No, I think it's true. I think you're right. Yeah.
So that was already in your mind frame of where you were going.
Yes.
And one of the things, because you have your company, Radiant Strategies, and then you're also the co-founder of Donors of Color. And one of the things that I know is a overarching theme for you is that you talk about democratizing and diversifying the field and practice of philanthropy. So I guess, can you first define what that means?
Yeah. Yeah, so I had the great luck of working with building the research and then the network with Urvashi Vad, may she rest in peace and power, and Ashindi Maxton were the three co-founders of the Donors of Color Network. And I got to lead the qualitative research that became one of the sort of intellectual underpinnings of the network. And what I mean by democratizing and diversifying the field and practice of philanthropy, because I think that was the grand effort that we were doing. And if I had to pick a word, it would be expansive. We were trying to be and I think it's a word that suits me generally. It's a word that is built into the Radiant, my consulting practice's DNA also. Like, we need to be expansive. And the Donors of Color Network research and network build is literally expanding the idea of who is a philanthropist and also what counts as philanthropy. And then I've been in this giving circle world for almost 20 years, and my giving circle, the Asian Women Giving Circle, it's kind of the same thing. The collective givers are sort of insisting that collective givers, meaning groups of people who are giving their time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties together, are also philanthropists. And actually, I make the argument in my book and in a bunch of my other writing that this is how we've always done it. It's just like gardening, what you say. That's the roots of what we do. And philanthropy, let's remember, comes from two Greek words that mean love of humankind. And philanthropy at its roots does not mean strategies, spreadsheets, logic models, or KPIs. These are modern day business constructs that we've laid on top of this thing that we've always done. And I think in doing so, we've lost our connection with our roots. And so it's a funny thing because, as you just said, it's almost like going back and also going forward. Being expansive for the Donors of Color build, philanthropy as a story in the United States, the story of philanthropy has never been fully told. It's been told as a mostly white story, as a mostly white and male story historically, and often sometimes as a dead white man's story. And that's just not the truth. This country is made up of people who come from everywhere, and all of us bring our cultural roots of generosity, community care, mutual aid, tontin, susu, ke, arisan, tanda. We bring these ideas with us. And as we do, all of these things can infuse the way that we practice our philanthropy in community with our friends, neighbors, girlfriends, colleagues, bookmates, book group mates, etc. And it's that idea of expanding what counts as philanthropy by including these forms, and also who counts as a philanthropist by including folks of color and groups. That's what I mean by democratizing and diversifying the field and practice of philanthropy.
Yeah, and one word that came to mind as I was thinking about what we have been programmed to look at philanthropy, even when, I guess initially when most people, or maybe not everyone, you always thought about older people
Yeah,
and people who are
usually.
dead, right?
Dead people. Yep.
Right? And I started thinking it's like a assertion of power. And so in that, being that obviously for dead people, it's like you seal the deal. See, I did a great job tying my bow on my gift,
Yep.
right? And so it makes sense then, I guess, that philanthropy in the traditional sense had that the power tie, and for people of color not having that power, that their whatever they contributed was looked at as less than, because it
On
wasn't come
on on purpose.
on
Like it's
purpose, because it wasn't coming from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's right. And it's an on purpose thing. It's by design. And it's really interesting because that's Annmarie, one of the things you're making me remember is I got to interview, I've interviewed 150 wealthy people of color across the country. And as you can imagine, how much fun is that project? I just had a blast getting to talk to people about their families, their stories, their grandmothers, where they learned generosity. And I remember a few people that I interviewed in Dallas. They were new to this country and also descendants of enslaved people who had been in this country for generations. And a common theme was learning philanthropy as a way of, as almost like part of joining a new social class. So when you, like the power thing that you just brought up, right? Like philanthropy is a form of power, and giving in this formal American philanthropic way is a form of asserting one's arrival into a new social class. So some of the folks I interviewed in Dallas and elsewhere talked very literally about, okay, my kids go to private school. I learned about annual funds and capital campaigns and joining committees that have to do with philanthropy at my kids' private school. And then I learned that in this city, joining the zoo board was the preeminent place to mingle and network and meet the movers and shakers in that town. So just literally learning like how to navigate new social roles as wealth increase was just a totally fascinating dynamic that people were very generous to share with me. And I think you're right. Like it is an assertion of power. Philanthropy is an assertion of power in the way that that we practice it, but it's also an assertion of values and legacy and meaning and community and belonging. And so let's not forget those other things that have to do with our humanity, in addition to the more political, I don't know, getting ahead things like social class and power.
Yes, and I was going to ask, the question is always already answered a little bit. For people of color, how do they, I was going to say, how are they different as givers? I think you just answered it, that they, and maybe I'm generalizing because there's always these outliers, but I think perhaps they think of the other aspects of
Yeah.
giving.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
can share some. Yeah, so I
Hmm.
wrote this report called Philanthropy Always Sounds Like Someone Else. And there's an executive summary that's a lot shorter and a full report. And there are some findings that I'm happy to share, just some of the highlights. Firstly, there are a lot of things that wealthy people of color do that are similar to what wealthy people in general do. The most obvious is education appears as the frequently number one destination of charitable beneficiaries is often an educational institution. So just like when you wealthy surveys happen in philanthropy, the Bank of America does a famous survey of wealthy people, and WealthX is another one. Educational institutions are often the number one destination. So Harvard and Stanford and MIT appear very frequently on the number one spots of the people that I interviewed as well. Things that were different, the differentials that, or I guess maybe rather, I'll share this as things that I was surprised by, things that I learned. Though we did not seek to find ultra high net wealth people, nearly a quarter of our sample reported liquid net assets north of $30 million. And we had to add a category. Like, this was in the sort of fill out the bubble part at the end. We asked people to just do some demographic stuff anonymously. And we had to add a category. We had to add some categories of wealth, because I just didn't expect that the people we were finding, because we did not seek to find the uber wealthy, but almost a quarter of our folks are in the ultra high net wealth category of 30 million and more. And that betrays a little bit of my own bias, I think, and our research bias about the wealth in our communities, I think, just frankly. Annual giving of the people that we interviewed ranged from about $5,000 a year, and that person was someone who's going to inherit a lot of money but wasn't in control of the assets yet, to several million a year. The median of the 113 that are in the report was $87,500. That was the median annual giving amount. The differential with the general surveys of wealthy people in America, and they're rarely disaggregated by race, so it's almost always way majority white donors that participate in these surveys. The 113 donors in the report I authored rate much higher issues having to do with equity, like race, gender, income inequality, appear in the top 6 destinations of their giving. Social justice was number 2 after education, and you will never find that in surveys of wealthy people generally. Nearly 80% of our sample were wealth earners and wealth creators themselves. They'd grown up middle class, working class, poor, and in some cases very poor. About 10% of our sample reported marriage as their primary source of wealth, and about 10% of our sample inherited money. And just to be clear, Annmarie, this is not indicative of wealthy people of color in America generally. It's just simply a report on the 113 people that I interviewed. A large percentage of our sample, 3/4 of our sample, reported financial support to family, with an expansive view of family, like cousins and aunties and neighborhood besties, ranging from giving them a few $1,000s a year to one woman who sent over $1 million every year back home to her family in India. 97 of the 113 people I interviewed gave politically, which is a really high percentage, but very few did so with gusto. It was obligatory often. Only a handful were bundlers for candidates and were super involved politically. So those are some of the, interesting findings from the report.
Yes, and it seems, I hate to say this, but in a way, I guess it's being the truth, I guess, is that the difference, if I had to point it out, is there is I guess if I would put a word on it, there is a kind of a future funding in maybe a white donors, like, okay, education, we're taking care of the kids who can argue with the kids, it looks good, here we go. But then for donors of colors, it's almost, let's attack the problems now. In a way,
there's
if I want to look at what you just described a little bit, it's okay, the kids, nobody argues against kids unless they're totally crazy.
Yeah.
But, and I don't know, I almost say it's, in a way, it is kind of how the society is. We'll push off the problems to somebody else. And then the other people are like, let's see what we can do now. And that's the thing that we face at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an astute observation, Annmarie, and I think it's also another way of saying maybe the same thing, is that the people that we interviewed have a lived experience that is different than someone who is white and is third generation wealth. The lived experience is just different. So it makes sense that the lived experience of someone who is a wealth earner and a person of color, their lived experience is going to inform what they think is important now to do with these extra dollars, which is what philanthropy dollars are. It's extra dollars after they've paid for their 3 houses in some cases and the college funds for their children and grandchildren. I think we can look at it as what's pressing in our faces, and we can also look at it as a lived experience that informs priorities.
Yes. And that I'm thinking through that as a little bit because, and just thinking of where we are from a nation, but also globally. I think right now, at least what I feel, obviously, we're always a little bit in a pressure cooker, but I think the pressure for change is just going, it's become, it's getting more extreme. And I think because I think a few things. I think people are becoming more braver vocally now because everyone has access to the tools. And what I mean by that is more people, there's more cell phones, and so access to Wi-Fi and internet and all those things. So people, and for the people who are scared to confront someone face by face, you don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
You can be anonymous number 114.
Yeah.
And so people are now more vocal because they don't feel that there's going to be maybe a direct backlash at them. And people want to exert their opinions, whether right or wrong. And then obviously there's the power struggle that's going on. But I think, yeah, it's just there is I guess, an overall question mark of what is important anymore going on.
Yeah, I think we are in this moment sociopolitically in the United States where we're facing these kind of big existential questions. And I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Not that there's an answer for these are
Yes.
big existential
Mhm.
questions, but just to I have a short story that kind of, I don't know. It's one response, I think, or one further, just to play with that idea a little bit, Annmarie. I remember at the first gathering of the Donors of Color Network, I was at a table, I think it was 2017. I can't believe it's been that long. Or maybe 2018. 2018. Yeah. Or no, 2019. God, I'm so sorry, Annmarie. My brain.
That's okay.
So we're in New Mexico, actually. We were just talking about that before you went live. And I happened to be sitting at this table listening with two older women, both African American women, one into her 70s and one like right there. So they were both older than me by a generation for sure. And speaking to them was this Asian American guy who was running a climate program. And as he was talking, these two women were chatting. They were not paying attention. And I was listening to them. And then I talked to them about it afterwards. And they both told me climate is something for white people who go hiking. They had this idea that climate change didn't affect Black families, didn't affect the people they cared about, their people, their families, their nieces and nephews and grandchildren. It wasn't their concern. And this is for people who hike, like Sierra Club. But the man who was speaking he was doing a slideshow that was showing climate's direct impact on Black families in New Orleans and all the places in America, Puerto Rico, all the things that we know. And little by little, these two women started paying attention because he was talking about people who looked like them. He was talking about their people, their families, people they love. And I got to witness these two women make their very first contribution to a climate cause because they heard a person of color making the connection between this issue that seemed big and vast and almost untouchable, unreachable, and also irrelevant to them. They were wrong, right? Like they were learning and they had open minds and hearts because of where we were. We were in a room full of people of color with wealth who wanted to practice their philanthropy together, which in itself is very powerful and moving. Like these rooms, Annmarie, like grown men would enter these rooms and cry. It was the first time any of us had been in a room like this, where there were like one or two white people and everyone else was a person of color. And it was all people with wealth. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, I felt so privileged to witness that moment for these two elder Black women who I got to be in community with. And it really hit home for me the power of being in a room like that where there is learning happening with open hearts. And they had the ability and mindset and community around them to be open to learning something about how climate change was affecting Black families and Black people in America. And they made their first gift because of it. So this is a moment of existential crisis for many of us for lots of reasons, Annmarie, but remembering instances and stories and people and moments like that do give me hope.
So then would you say that philanthropy right now that, and I'll let you lay this out, but would you say that in philanthropy right now, one of the biggest changes that needs to happen is that there needs to be a re-education?
Rerooting and a recommitment to values, I think. And some of that can come with education, like for these two women who I just shared, and also some of it, I think, literally is reconnecting to what we've always done. How many I don't know if you've been an executive director or worked at a nonprofit, having to jump through all the hoops of the funding. Like, the last 20 years of philanthropy has been this model of philanthropy called strategic philanthropy. I nickname him Big Phil in my book. The first third of my book is a critique of billionaire, rich guy knows best, business model minded philanthropy called strategic philanthropy. His nickname is Big Phil. Please feel free to use it. And by the end of part one of my book, The Big We, I ask Big Phil respectfully to retire in peace, to make way for the rest of us, because Big Phil casts a really big shadow. And the reason Big Phil is not the model going forward, in my opinion, I ask you and your readers to put an image in their head of the inauguration of Trump 2.0 in January, this past January. The three men behind him on the dais on our inauguration day were Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk. Those three men control as much wealth as 50% of Americans. So, to say that another way, those three men control as much wealth as 170 million of us in this country. And that is not sustainable. It is I'm morally outraged by the inequality that is summed up in that picture. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of being morally outraged when the time calls for it. And it's not sustainable. It's not fair. It's honestly gross. And it's the perfect picture of the wealth inequality that is going to wreck our country. The answer is a more communal form. The answer is a more collective form. The Big Phil in the philanthropic sector is a cousin of those three guys on the stage. The philanthropy has been practiced in this way that sort of prioritizes Big Phil over the rest of us. And I think, and I try to contend in my book, that collectives of us are the response and are the more democratic response to the more individualistic, heroic, rich guy knows best frame that's been so pervasive over the last 20 years.
And saying that, it is also dealing with it in like this, I guess, the whole oligarchy versus what democracy is. That's
Totally.
literally what we're facing.
Totally.
And to go back to philanthropy, going from that same model and going back to, I don't think anyone, unless they're totally playing the ostrich, doesn't see that there's a lot of work to do. Out here, there's
Yeah.
no one person without eventually dying from burnout or maybe killing themselves because they're like, I can't do it anymore. It can deal with the amount of issues and problems that have and are surfacing at such a I think some of these problems, obviously, they've always been around. We just maybe didn't know about them because we weren't so technologically connected. But now, because of the technology, then we have even more problems that we've added to the mix, right? And those technological problems are rapidly coming at us. It's like bam, 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 bam. It's worse than a game of Bonkamall. And I think it if we plan to be sustainable as a society, we have no choice than to jump in and start taking pieces of this and breaking it down. And we have to go to a collective model because I don't think unless people want to start keeling over, trying to work on these individually, that we're going to make the changes that we need to. And I know this is probably a perfect transition then into your book, The Big We.
Yeah, just to add one idea to that, Annmarie, is I think the question in front of us as non-billionaire people is, do we want to put the 5 T's, right? Time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties. There's actually more than 5, but those are the common ones. Do we want to put our 5 T's in service of these billionaires, or do we want to put our 5 T's to be in service to all the rest of us? And the answer is pretty obvious, right? So that means that we have to engage as citizens in order to activate our power, our collective power. Because me, as one middle-aged Asian lady, I can't go up against Elon Musk or Donald Trump or, right? I'm just a little ant. But me, arm in arm with you and 100 other people or more, then we have a shot at making our voices heard. So that's why I think the answer has to be us collectivizing ourselves, collecting our power, using our voice together, pulling our money, pulling our hours, putting our bodies, going out and marching, like in any form that you want, really, and that you have the appetite. And not all of us are marchers on the street, for sure. Some of us are quieter. Like, you don't have to do all the things, but do some of the things and do it arm in arm with your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and college roommates, whoever. That's where I end my book.
Yeah, so I would say that it's time that we give our own philanthropy as people and start fighting back for issues that are right in front of our face that we want to ignore, because it's become to a point of like just this critical for just daily living.
I don't think we have a
and
choice.
yeah,
It's not a
yeah.
luxury.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I keep telling people the sidelines are gone. We just really can't. People have to. I don't mean to be, as somebody said, don't be pessimistic, but I'm like, no, I'm a bit of a realist. I think if we continue the next 20 years, we we'll just go with the flow. I think we're going to be in a very ugly spot.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, like civic engagement, right? What does that really mean? And if I could wave a magic wand, it starts with preschool. I don't
Mhm.
remember. I remember. I don't know. You're not old enough, but do you remember Schoolhouse Rock? Like, I'm
Mhm.
just a bill
Mm.
sitting here
I
on
actually
Capitol.
I look young, but I'm actually older. Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
there were
Mhm.
these
Yes.
cartoons, right? And I don't know if I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't think my 8-year-old niece knows about the separation of church and state. I don't think she knows about how even the faintest idea of how a bill becomes a law, or the division of powers, or the three branches of government and checks and balances. So civic engagement really does start when they're babies, right? But what can philanthropy do to support that in our to re-engage, reconnect, retie ourselves to those early roots of what it means to live and build a democracy, our imperfect system, but it's all we got, right? And I write in my book that our system works only when its citizens, and that would be you and me and all of us, right, are civically engaged. And if you break down what that means, I think it means that you care enough to get educated about what's happening on your block or in your neighborhood, in your town. And you have to learn about these things, right? And then if you can do it with groups, go out and figure out what are the things that people that are happening in order to address those things. In my block in Brooklyn, it's trash because there's been a proliferation of rats on my block. So we have to get in, like on for my block association, it's literally rats and trees. So that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with equity, racial justice, gender justice, the things that I spend my day working on in my day job. But it has everything to do with my neighborhood and my block association and my neighborhood, my neighbors who I see every day and run into when I'm buying my bagel. You know what I mean? So start there, and someone will go to the. I don't have to go to the city council meetings, but it's one of my neighbors will. I don't have to go to the rat czar meetings with other neighbors, even though those sound kind of fun, but one of my neighbors will. So that's one way that I think we can build that civic engagement muscle that I know mine have gotten lazy and weak. And if ever there was a time when we need to exercise our civic engagement muscles, Annmarie, it is now.
Yes, I actually did an episode on like relearning civics. 'Cause I think what you mentioned is a lot of people, they don't even know what the government is about, how
Hmm.
what the basics are. It's been lost. So, like when I look back to earlier times, people knew these things and they had it memorized. But now people, they just, I don't know how it just became such a mess. It's just, oh, I don't know. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But no, there's actually steps. We actually have a government.
Yep.
So yes, I agree 100% with that. And yes, and I like your approach of explaining like starting small with something that is close to you and something that you're dealing with in your daily life or with people that you know in order to make that difference? Because I'm sure I'm not living in the community, but I'm sure if I'm just going to be a little bit funny, if you get the rats to relocate, right? Yeah, it makes life more peaceful that at night when you hear rustling in the trees, you're not like, they're at it again, and they're at it
Yeah,
again.
I know, which is literally what one ran over my shoe the
Oh
other day. I
god,
was walking my dog.
I don't do well with bugs and critters. I might have to be like I'm moving out to the tent or something. I just don't do well. But I'd be like, I did have, these were some years ago, and I had went down to a downtown restaurant, and they were having like, I don't know, it was like an overrun of like roaches,
Ugh,
and they were coming up from the sewer late at night, and the street was covered, and I was like, I'm just not going in the restaurant. We'll just keep driving on.
I
Like,
know. It's a
yes.
visceral thing. It's a
Yes.
totally and rats actually are a good example because I live on a really pretty block. I love my block. Really nice, generally really nice neighbors, and it's a bubble for sure. But if one house doesn't use the right like the a proper container with a lid, like a hard plastic trash can with a lid, it just takes one person that keeps putting their trash out in plastic bags that animals that can easily rip through, and then they're really on our block. They're always going to be there, but we just don't want them to proliferate so much. So it is it's an example of when we really do all have to try to do the right thing. Otherwise, it screws it up for the rest of us. So not that we've solved it, but there are various ideas on the table. Can we subsidize getting those better trash cans for people who need a little help? Can we just do it as a block association rather than counting on every single person to do it on their own? And I think in this case, we should. Like our block we can afford to put a little bit of money to buy the subsidized trash cans that the city is providing for this period of time to try to get the rat population under control. My book is really written for a general audience. I think it's really for everyone. It's not for philanthropy people. It's not for professional social impact people at all. And one of the things that I try to do in my book and the talking about it and talking with folks like you is think about all the small things that you can do to just get started. Like I interviewed a guy in Eau Claire. He's a faith leader. He's a pastor in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And he was just telling me some stuff about, he was getting involved in the Supreme Court race that just happened in Wisconsin for the state Supreme Court. And he was telling me about one of his parishioners who is a woman, a little bit older, and she's one of the, like, a very big member, I guess, an active member of that Tiny Pricks Project, which is that Instagram craftivism account where people are posting needlepoint and
Hmm.
cross stitch and crochet that are poking fun at some of the MAGA stuff that comes up in the news. And it's their way of protest. And they're using their what do you call it? So they have a little bit of a platform now because it's become a really popular Instagram place for people who like to knit and crochet, who are also politically aware and politically active. He talked about he himself is in an adult choir, and their form of, I don't know, sitting in their values, singing in their values, as it were, is to sing a repertoire that is 100% written by immigrants to various countries, not just this one. And they are making a point in their choir to live their values by singing a repertoire 100% of immigrants. I met another person when this was actually my Giving Circle friend, and a lot of us did this when October 7th happened and it was horrible on both sides, obviously, but the ongoing devastation in Gaza is just completely heartbreaking and horrific. So a lot of my friends in New York were trying to go eat at and shop at Palestinian-owned restaurants and stores. There's ways that all of us as individuals can express ourselves by spending our dollars, where we spend our dollars, who I hire to do my taxes, who I hire to, I don't know, where we spend our dollars is an expression of our values, right? So where I shop, where I eat out, also obviously where I vote, where I volunteer, how I choose to spend my time. These are all ways that individuals all small things actually, that we can do as citizens, right, to express our values and be in solidarity with people who are different from us. And all of these things become even more powerful when we do them as a group.
Now, I have hopefully a fun question, or maybe it isn't. But I guess when you had the title of your book, did you come up with the title of the Big We, and then why?
I did, and it comes from this other thing that I've been building, and actually it comes from the Donors of Color Networks. My small Radiant team and I have been building this philanthropy curriculum called Freedom School for Philanthropy, and after we had noticed, and because of our work, that a lot of the wealthy people we were with and around wanted to practice their philanthropy differently, especially after the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckonings across this country at that time, and COVID and ongoing attacks on our democracy. And so my team and I built this curriculum, and the arc of it follows a me to we to big we arc. So it starts with me. So pretend it's me, Holly. I'm Korean American. I mentioned my mom and dad who have always supported me. I think I stand on their shoulders. And my grandfather was a freedom fighter in Korea who lost his life because he believed in democracy. So I never knew him, but he's in me. And if I'm lucky, I got one atom of his courage and of his courage, I guess, period. So the first part of the curriculum is me, like my values, my power, my educational privileges, et cetera. On whose shoulders do I stand to do this work? The middle section is we. So for me, who are my we groups? It could be my college roommates who I'm still close with, my workmates, my giving circle in my case. I'm part of a stitch and bitch. We get together and knit and bitch and crochet and drink and stuff irregularly, but regularly. And then the last part of the arc is the big we. And what is the change that we want to see in the world? What is my role in bringing and trying to make that change? What are the systems that undergird all that we do in America, meaning racial systems, taxation systems, capital systems? So we touch on those things in the last third of the book. So it's not a coincidence that I was writing my book, The Big We, at the same time that we were finishing up this curriculum and piloting it with advisors and philanthropy advisors and donors directly over the last couple of years. And then when I was building the Donors of Color Network, we asked people to share their stories as we were building this brand new thing. So the frame that I gave them, and this is starting when we were doing the research almost 10 years ago now, I would ask them to think about that same frame, that same arc move from a me to a we to a big we. And the question therein is really, what can we do together that none of us alone can do? Like, how can we be stronger together than we can be the sum of our individual parts? And I think that's the question of our moment in this right now. And it's also the question that underlies my work at Radiant, and also the question that sort of undergirds my book. So that was kind of a long answer, but it's related. My book is related to the work that I do and have always done. It's an ongoing body of work, and I hope to keep doing it for a lot longer, Annmarie. We'll see.
No, no, and I feel like it just came out at the perfect time. And I guess, was writing a book, was that something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that like friends and family pushed you into doing, or?
No, I would say neither of those things. But it's a real privilege to get to do this work. Like, you and I get to think about
The big picture.
values. Yeah, and like the world and legacy and what's my small role. We get to think about these cool things. Like, we're really lucky to get to do this work. And I'm so lucky. I've been in this giving circle work for 20 years. My giving circle's turning 20, as I mentioned. And as I've been doing it for so long, that I've met all these incredible people. And it was over time, it's almost like the suitcase just starts to burst. I had all these stories of all these incredible people around the world who are not billionaires. They're regular people who have jobs and families and are having babies and are getting laid off and are moving, and whose parents are ill and dying. Like, they're regular people who are going through all the things that we go through. But yet they have this thing they consistently work with they're consistently building this practice. They're exercising their civic engagement muscles in this beautiful way of doing good with their friends in groups. And it just felt like I got to tell these stories because I had them. It felt like it was almost like an imperative. So I didn't always want to write a book. No one told me to write this book. I really felt like I had to write this book. And you know what? I really liked it, Annmarie. I had a lot of fun writing this book. I had a lot of fun interviewing, like, getting deeper into the stories that I knew a little bit about, and the cutting room floor is tragic because a lot of the stories, obviously, it couldn't be a 1,000-page book, so I had to cut a lot, and it was really fun to think about the themes that this project relates to, because I think these stories of regular Americans doing incredible things is touches on a lot of the, I don't know, the important topics of our moment, like our democracy and this epidemic of loneliness that's really killing us. And the antidote to loneliness is, of course, belonging. And it's one of those rare maladies that doesn't require a gajillion dollars to fix. I could have written a whole book on that, Annmarie. There's mayors around the world who are thinking about this problem because it's an economics problem too. They're losing money because of the loneliness epidemic in lots of different ways. It's so fascinating when you read about it, which I did some reading for those 4 pages of my book. Like, people are doing creative things that aren't that expensive, like installing chatty benches in public parks to encourage strangers to talk one another, or putting barter stations in church basements or at elder senior centers to encourage people to go in and trade their stuff and also talk with the elder people or the people of the church who were there. There's a lot of and there's architectural experiments and city planning experiments to get people to connect. And giving circles are one way that people are finding anyways, because they don't cost a lot of money and almost anyone can do them. So I'm hoping that my book, it does engage with some of these ideas that are timely and of our moment and important for right now. And I'm also hoping that when people read it, they can see a way in for them to do something, to feel like they can have a little bit of efficacy, to feel a little bit less overwhelmed, to feel a little bit like, okay, I do have a kitchen table. I can invite 5 friends to sit around it. I can add a seat or 2 for someone who's just outside my group of regulars, you know? And I guess kitchen tables are a metaphor throughout my book, and that's because kitchen tables have been the locus of a lot of powerful organizing in this country, especially for women, queer folks, and people of color. And the reason I like this as a metaphor for right now is that most of us have a kitchen table or a living room with 3 seats. Most of us have a place where we can invite people, or we know someone who does and we can be invited in. And I ask people to consider their kitchen tables as a locus of organizing for the rats and trees, or to go to that protest, or to go to that city council meeting, or to go meet that candidate, or to go eat at that Palestinian-owned restaurant, or to go all the things that we can, or to choir practice and sing a repertoire of immigrant composers. It's something that we can all do, and it's something that we all have, and it's something that we can all use. And to that metaphor of a kitchen table, I add a plea, which is to please add a leaf or 2 or a chair or 2 to expand the table to include people who are just a little bit different than the ones who you would normally include. And that's so that we don't reify echo chambers or our own biases, to always keep refreshing with perspectives and opinions and experiences that are just outside of the ones that I naturally have.
Yeah, I always like the table metaphor because I'm going back to my love of food, but I look at food as,
Yes.
but food is, I always say, an equalizer because everybody has to eat or you die, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I always say food is the ultimate equalizer. Like, we all have to do it. It doesn't matter if you're a bazillionaire or a poor of the poor. We all have to sit and we have to eat. And so it is the thing that makes us the most human.
Yeah.
And having the table and using that metaphor throughout and extending that table, knowing that this is the one thing across the board that we have, no matter what place you are in the world, what race you are, or anything, it is the thing that extends to everyone. And it's at that moment when we are in that consumption that we see each other as another human.
Yeah. And
The yeah.
that's what it takes,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Building relationships and being in community is everything right now. It's literally everything. We've got to build relationships and build community with our people and beyond, with an expansive view of who our people are, right? We've got to trust and be trustworthy. There's 2 sides of that. If I'm going to trust you, then I'm going to trust that you're going to be trustworthy for me, and vice versa, right? And as you say, around food, around just sitting around a kitchen table is really the best way to do it.
Yes. And I have one final question I've been toying with. Do I give you a beauty pageant question of the global one, like how are you going to save the world?
Oh God, don't ask me
or,
that one.
or I guess I'll bring it down to a little bit of practicality. But what advice, I guess, would you offer to emerging leaders in philanthropy that how can they start fostering and like showing that they're fostering equity and inclusion without it being like performative, right? Because sometimes I feel that they're like, oh, it's the people go through the check box of, okay, we've got the Black person. Okay, great. We got the
Yeah.
woman. Okay, great. We got somebody, they have a Hispanic last name. Great.
Yeah.
They go through it's just like we check the boxes.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes, and this is going to sound wrong, but sometimes they pick the people that they're like, they know a friend of a friend that knows, and they're like, oh, yeah, I think they have a little Hispanic. Bring them on, right? Right.
Yeah.
But it's not somebody that like, that really is like understanding what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
So, how can they start to do it for, I guess I'll use the word real?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, and I do a lot of I guess I get asked this a lot by young people who are in the field or they're new in their careers, whether they're fundraisers or nonprofit staffers or social impact people. And I actually think it's about being real, starting with yourself. Be willing to share some of your why. Why are you in this work? On whose shoulders do you stand to do this work? Be willing to share some of that in order to elicit some of those same things from the people that you're trying to engage. And I've done a lot of interviews with folks of color. I've interviewed a lot of wealthy white people as well for this curriculum that we've been building and some of my other work. And it's this funny thing. It's really hard for some of my white friends to talk about culture. And part of the harm that I think racism has done in this country is to strip white people of their culture. But when you ask, like I was interviewing a woman and she's a very wealthy white woman and she grew up working class, but she's very wealthy now. She had a really hard time answering this question. Like she started saying, I'm a cis white woman with wealth. And I was like, come on, tell me about your grandma. And then the most amazing things came out. Like I learned about grandpa who left this very religious Lutheran German speaking town in the northern Midwest and left on his own to go to LA and started this whole thing around music and became very successful and ended up starting a family foundation. And another family member had been like the church secretary and had been discounted as a woman, but she was actually incredibly smart and the real leader of that community, though she was a woman and not educated in the formal way. Like all this incredible stuff came out, but it took a little bit of prodding. And one of the ways that I was able to get this woman to start talking about her grandmother was to share a little bit about mine. So this barrier of like professional versus personal, I've always thought that's kind of bullshit. And I think especially right now when we've got to try to build bridges across difference and in order to find the unlikely allies that we're going to need to find in order to be a more united, bigger front against the attacks on our democracy and the attacks on our individual freedoms, actually, our Constitution and Bill of Rights actually in America right now. We have to build these bridges across differences. And I think one of the ways we can do that, just drilling it down to that person who's got a new job and who's maybe young at the nonprofit, maybe they're a development person. I really suggest like starting with the relatedness, and part of doing that is being able and willing to share some of your why. I also recommend to young people I speak with to use the interview instrument that's Appendix A in the full report, the Donors of Color Research Report. It's got the full interview instrument that we use to do the 150 interviews to make that to build that body of work. And the first third of it is all about family. We don't talk about money until the last third of the interview. And I think that's an instructive thing for people who are new in this sector, especially development professionals, which I've been, and nonprofit people who are working on the resource side. Look at it. You don't have to use it, but just look at it. Maybe there are a few questions in there that can help you as you build the relationships that your organization will need to sustain its operating budgets over the long haul.
I like that is something different that I haven't heard before is that not being afraid of culture, that everyone has culture.
Yeah.
That white people, I guess I saw it, but not, I guess I saw it, but I didn't see it at the same time, is the fear of having a culture, of having that individuality, of just not being across the board the same and not embracing their own culture that they grew up in their families, because every family has some kind of culture,
Yep.
everyone. And trying to ignore that to be like, oh, I'm part of the group.
Yep.
But that's actually hurting us, because then that takes away the individuality, it takes away the humanity, and it
Yep.
takes us the ability to see each other so that we can start doing things to move forward in positive ways and effective ways. And so I think that's a great message just for people in general. Embrace your culture. It's okay, right?
Yep.
Like, one of the things, like, I don't know how everybody feels about when they go to death, but it'd be very depressing, I think, to be for eternity stuck in an all foggy white heaven forever, and you never get to see color again.
Yeah. It's literally like a bleached coral reef. It's the metaphor I end the report Daughters of Color report on. It's a
Mhm.
bleached coral reef. No one that's a dead coral reef. Like, none of us wants that.
Yeah, it
It's
would
not
be like a
life.
nightmare. It wouldn't feel
It's a
like heaven.
nightmare. Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. Yeah,
Yes,
totally.
so I love that, and embrace culture across the board. So, beautiful answer. Thank you, Holly, for your time and insight. To learn more about Holly Lee, go to radiantstrategies.co. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.work/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.